Okay. Captions are on. Chat is up. Do my best to not be distracted by it, though. Okay. I'll do my best, but there's no guarantee that I won't get distracted. Microphone's at negative 18.2. I think that's good because it doesn't need to be insanely loud, you know? But this is going to be a book reading. Chapter 4 of How to Raise Your Self-Esteem. Put on my glasses. Ohio, good morning, bunny. Thank you for joining me as we read Chapter 4 of How to Raise Your Self-Esteem. The name of this chapter is Learning Self-Acceptance. Let's begin. If the essence of living consciously is respect for facts and reality, then self-acceptance is the ultimate test. When the facts we must face have to do with ourselves, living consciously can suddenly become very difficult. Here is where the challenge of self-acceptance enters. Self-acceptance asks that we approach our experience with an attitude that makes the concepts of approval or disapproval irrelevant, the desire to see, to know, to be aware. Now, to be self-accepting does not mean to be without a desire to change, improve, or evolve. The truth is that self-acceptance is a precondition of change. If we accept the fact that we feel and if we accept the fact of what we feel and what we are at any given moment of our existence, we can permit ourselves to be aware fully of the nature of our choices and actions, and our development is not blocked. Let us begin with a simple example. Stand in front of a full-length mirror and look at your face and body. Notice your feelings as you do. Probably you will like some parts of what you see more than others. If you are like most people, you will find some parts difficult to look at for long, because they agitate or displease you. Perhaps you see a pain in your face you do not want to confront. Perhaps there is some aspect of your body you so dislike that you can hardly bear to keep your eyes focused there. Perhaps you see signs of age and cannot bear to stay connected with the thoughts and emotions those signs evoke, so the impulse is to escape, to flee from consciousness, to reject, deny, disown aspects of yourself. But stay focused on your image in the mirror a few moments longer. And experiment with saying to yourself, whatever my defects or imperfections, I accept myself unreservedly and completely. Stay focused, breathe deeply, and say this over and over again for a minute or two without rushing the process. Rather, allow yourself to experience fully the meaning of your words. You may find yourself protesting, but I don't like certain things about my body, so how can I accept unreservedly and completely? But remember, accepting does not mean liking. Accepting does not mean we cannot imagine or wish for changes or improvements. It means experiencing, without denial or avoidance, that a fact is a fact. In this case, it means accepting that the face and body in the mirror are your face and body, and that they are what they are. If you persist, if you surrender to reality, if you surrender to awareness, which is what accepting ultimately means, you may notice that you have begun to relax a bit, and perhaps feel more comfortable with yourself and more real. Even though you may not like or enjoy everything that you see when you look in the mirror, you are still able to say, right now, that's me, and I don't deny the fact, I accept it. That is respect for reality. Do this exercise for 2 minutes every morning and every night, and within a very short time, you will begin to experience the relationship between self-acceptance and self-esteem. A mind that honors sight honors itself. And you will make another important discovery. Not only will you be in a more harmonious relationship to yourself, not only will you grow in self-confidence and self-respect, but if there are aspects of yourself that you do not like and that are within your power to change, you will be more motivated to make the changes once you have accepted the facts they now are. We are not moved to change those things whose reality we deny. Our self-esteem is not a function of our physical attractiveness, as some people naively imagine, but our willingness or unwillingness to see and accept ourselves does have consequences for self-esteem. Wait a minute, did I skip something? But our willingness or unwillingness to see and accept ourselves does have consequences for self-esteem. Our attitude toward the person we see in the mirror is only one example of the issue of self-acceptance. Let us consider others. Take a little sippy. Suppose you were about to give a talk to a group of people Suppose you were about to give a talk to a group of people and you are afraid, or you are about to enter a party where you know only a few people and you are feeling insecure or shy. You are distressed by your anxiety and you try to fight it the way most people do, by tensing your body, contracting your breathing, and telling yourself, don't be afraid or shy. This strategy does not work. In fact, it makes your discomfort worse. Your body is now sending your brain the signals of an empty alert, the signals of danger, to which you typically respond by fighting. I don't know that word. Disquietude? Disquietude?
Disquietude.
A state of uneasiness or anxiety. God, I knew I shouldn't have taken off the headphones.
Disquietude.
Well, how about that? Disquietude. A state of uneasiness or anxiety. I have never heard that word before. I guess I should probably put it in the chat. It's like, what the fuck is that word? Imagine looking at that word and being like, what the fuck does that mean? Anyway, now we know. It just put anxiety, you know? That makes me anxious. No, I'm just kidding. Where was I? There we go. Your body's now sending your brain the signals of an emergency alert and the signals of danger, to which you typically respond by fighting your disquietude still more ferociously with tension, with oxygen deprivation, and perhaps with anger and self-reproach. You are at war with yourself because you do not know what else to do. No one has ever taught you, and you have never learned, that an alternative strategy exists that is far more helpful. It is the strategy of self-acceptance. In this strategy, you do not fight the feeling of distress. Rather, you breathe into it, accept it. Perhaps you tell yourself, boy, am I afraid. And then you take a long, slow, deep breath. You concentrate on breathing gently and deeply. Even though this is difficult at first, and may remain difficult for some time, you persevere. You watch your fear, become a witness to it, without identifying it, without allowing it to define you. If I'm afraid, I'm afraid, but that's no reason to go unconscious. Let me continue to use my eyes. Let me continue to see. You may even choose to talk to your fear, inviting it to tell you the worst imaginable thing that can happen, so that can be faced and accepted too. A strategy that tends to bring you out of self-tormenting fantasies and into far more benign reality. You may become aware of when and how this fear began in you. You may appreciate more deeply that it is groundless, that it is, in effect, an obsolete response having no real relevance to the present. By accepting it completely, you may find that you are released from the past into the present. Your fear may not always disappear. Sometimes it will only diminish, but you will be relatively more relaxed and freer to act effectively. We are always stronger when we do not try to fight reality. We cannot make our fear go away by yelling at it, or yelling at ourselves, or indulging in self-rebuke. But if we can open to our experience, stay conscious, and remember that we are larger than any one emotion, we can, at minimum, begin to transcend unwanted feelings, and often we can dispel them, since full, sincere acceptance tends in time to dissolve negative or unwanted feelings such as pain, anger, envy, or fear. If a person is afraid, It is usually futile to tell him or her to relax. The person does not know how to translate that advice into the behavior. But if you speak of gently deepening the breathing, or of imagining what it might feel like to not fight the fear, then you are proposing an actable, that is, something that a person can do. A person should think of expanding to allow that fear in, even of welcoming the fear, making friends with it, or at least watch it without identifying with it. And finally project the worst that might happen, and then face that. One can certainly learn to say, I am feeling fear, and I can accept that fact, but I am more than my fear. In other words, do not identify with the fear. Think, I recognize my fear, and I accept it. And now, let me see if I can remember how my body feels when I am not afraid. This is a very powerful device for handling fear, or any other unwanted feeling. These are actions you can learn, rehearse in imagination, and practice when fear situations arise. The practice I am describing is appropriate for virtually any fear. It is useful in the dentist chair, or when preparing to ask for a raise, or when facing a difficult interview, or when having to tell someone a painful information, or when grappling with fears of rejection or abandonment. When you learn to accept fear, you cease making a catastrophe of it. Then it ceases to be your master. You are no longer tortured by fantasies that may bear little or no relation to reality. You are free to see people and situations as they are. You feel more efficacious. You feel more in control of your life. Self-confidence and self-respect rise. Self-esteem rises through this process, even when fears are not the product of irrational fantasies, but in fact, the particular reality you have to confront is dreadful. I had a good friend who, some years ago, was hit by a devastating cancer. At the time, I thought her bravery in coping with it was extraordinary. I remember a day, visiting her in the hospital, when she told me this story. Her doctors had told her radiation therapy was necessary. The prospect terrified her. She asked if she could go to the radiation room for a few minutes each day for 3 days, before treatment began. I just want to look at the machine, she told her doctors. Make friends with it. Then I'll be ready. I won't be afraid, she said to me. I just sat looking at the machine, accepting it, accepting my situation, and meditating on the fact that the machine existed to help me. It made the treatment so much easier. Eventually, she died. But I will never forget her serenity and dignity. She knew how to value herself. It is as beautiful an illustration of the principle of acceptance as I have ever seen. Take a few minutes to contemplate some feeling or emotion of yours that is not easy for you to face. Insecurity, pain, envy, rage, sorrow, humiliation, fear. When you isolate the feeling, see if you can bring it into clear focus, perhaps by thinking of or imagining whatever typically evokes it. Then breathe into the feeling, as if opening your body to it. Imagine what it would feel like not to resist this feeling, but to accept it fully. Explore that experience. Take your time. Practice saying to yourself, I am now feeling such and such, whatever the feeling is, and I accept it fully. At first, this may be difficult. You may find that you tense your body in protest, but persevere. Concentrate on your breathing. Think of giving your muscles permission to let go of their tension. Remind yourself, a fact is a fact. That which is, is. If the feeling exists, it exists. Keep contemplating the feeling. Think of allowing the feeling to be there rather than trying to wish or will it out of existence. You may find it useful, as I have, to tell yourself, I am now exploring the world of fear or pain or envy or confusion or whatever. In doing so, you will be exploring the world of self-acceptance. Oof. Accidentally hit the microphone. Or I guess just the pop filter. But anywho. Okay. I was once in a physician's office where I had to take a series of rather painful injections. In response to the shock and pain of the first needle, I stopped breathing and contracted my whole body, as if to hold off an invading army. But of course, tensing my muscles made penetration more difficult, and therefore made the experience more painful. My wife, Devers, who was in the office receiving the same injections, noticed this and said to me, "As you feel the needle touch your skin, breathe in, as if drawing the needle in with your breath. Imagine that you are welcoming the needle." I immediately realized that this is precisely what I teach people to do with emotions. So I did what Devers proposed, and the needle entered with almost negligible discomfort. I accepted the needle and any attendant feelings rather than treat them as adversaries. This strategy is very familiar, of course, to athletes and dancers whose work requires them to ride with pain rather than convulse against it. And the Lamaze breathing exercises taught to pregnant women for controlling and easing pain, anxiety, and body reactions embody precisely the principle we are considering here. In therapy, I sometimes work with women who have a difficulty experiencing orgasm during intercourse. We're getting here. Since fear often acts to inhibit pleasure and therefore orgasm, and since fear often triggers the response of cutting off breathing and contracting the muscles, as if defending against the invading penis, I did not expect the word penis to be there. I teach women to reverse this process. Women learn to breathe in as the penis enters, to accept the penis. They learn to expand in welcome rather than contract in rejection. In doing so, they learn to accept and achieve a higher degree of comfort and pleasure in intercourse rather because they are surrendering to the experience rather than fighting it. Yes? Not when I'm in the middle of... I'm reading a book. What do you mean how long? I when I'm done. I don't know how long it's going to take. I am annoyed. Just trying to do what the book is telling me to do. Just identify your feelings and sit with them. Being annoyed isn't a good feeling, but just distracted, I guess. Anyway, because if I stay in this room and keep reading this book, I never have to go back out there. I can have a purpose in this book. In the process, of course, fantasies of being hurt or destroyed, or falling dangerously out of control, tend to disappear. A woman able to allow herself orgasms clearly is more in control than one who is incapacitated by fear. The point is, acceptance releases us into reality. The principle we need to remember remains the same. Whether it is fear or pleasure we are contracting against, do not be in an adversarial relationship to your own experience. If you permit an adversarial relationship to develop, you intensify negatives while depriving yourself of positives. Following are 4 illustrations of situations where people choose to practice either self-acceptance or self-disowning. Practicing self-acceptance. Lucian began to notice that he was sexually attracted to his next-door neighbor. He considered himself a happily married man, and his initial reaction was to reproach himself. But he soon decided that it was better to understand himself than to practice blind self-rebuke. He allowed himself to experience, in his inner life, the sexual attraction. He paid attention to the feelings his neighbor evoked in him, and he permitted his fantasies free rein. Soon he became aware that it was not so much his neighbor he hungered for as new stimulation, and not because he was bored with his wife, but because he was bored with his job. He saw that a new woman offered the promise of a moment's experience of effectiveness, which his work was no longer providing. He did not feel guilty. He regarded his response to his neighbor merely as a source of valuable information about frustrations within himself. He knew he would not betray his wife, but he did not allow himself to imagine what an affair with his neighbor might be like. At dinner that evening, he said to his wife, "This afternoon, sitting by myself in the yard for an hour, I had an 8-month affair with the lady next door." The serenity and amusement of his manner told his wife that it was nothing to fear, so she inquired, "And how was it?" Lucian took his wife's hand and answered, "Frustrating, pointless. It wasn't the answer, but I think finding a different kind of work might be." Practicing self-disowning. What Lucian did not know was that his neighbor, Marcia, had erotic feelings for him, and since she regarded such feelings as sinful, she repressed them. So this is practicing self-disowning. I don't think I read that part. She became more and more tense with her husband and children. She had fits of weeping she could not explain. When she occasionally crossed paths with Lucian, she was alternately rude and flirtatious. The way of child is flirtatious, who does not yet fully know what she is doing. Marcia had been unhappy in her marriage for a long time, but she did not allow herself to confront that, since to allow her divorce meant humiliation and failure. Had she allowed herself to accept and examine her feelings for Lucian, and perhaps discuss them with her husband, she might have gained valuable insight into her condition. But as a girl, she had been taught that to lust after another person in your heart is as wicked as committing adultery, and she did not want to be wicked, so the only solution she knew was unconsciousness. In the end, after years of misery and non-communication, her husband divorced her. Feeling betrayed, abandoned, and victimized, Marcia pondered, why do the good people in the world always have to suffer? Can you relate anything in these two stories to yourself? Practicing self-acceptance. Gina was devastated when, following her divorce, her children informed her that they preferred to live with their father. She knew that she had been an impatient, unempathetic, careless mother, and that her former husband had been better nurturer to the children than she had been. This was not easy to admit, as it was very painful. But with the children gone, she had many opportunities to be alone and to think about the past. The truth is, she finally admitted to herself, I never wanted to be a mother. I became one because I thought I was supposed to. She spent many silent hours meditating on her past choices, not for the purpose of self-criticism, but for the purpose of self-understanding. She became able to accept that it was better for her children to be with their father. Then slowly, she became able to face and accept something far more difficult, because it did violence to so much. She became able to face and accept something far more difficult, because it did violence to so much that she had been taught. She was happy that her children had chosen to live with her former husband. She felt free and unencumbered for the first time in her life. Consequently, when she was with her children, and she chose to see them often, they encountered a happier and more affectionate mother than they had ever known before. When friends and relatives tried to make her feel guilty for being an unnatural mother, she looked at them tranquilly and did not attempt to defend herself. She knew who she was, and she accepted it, and that was all that mattered. I regret my past mistakes, she told herself, but I don't think the way to redeem myself is to make more of them by repudiating my wants and needs once again. Practicing self-disowning. One day, when Jack was 62, his 25-year-old son, Mark, tried to talk to him about what it had been like to be Jack's son. I was so frightened of you when I was little, said Mark. You were so violent. I never knew when you were going to swing out and hit me. Jack snapped irritably. I don't want to hear about this. Mark answered patiently. Look, Dad, I know it's uncomfortable for you. You must think my intention is to reproach you and to make you feel bad. It isn't. I want us to be friends. I want to understand where you were coming from. You must have been terribly unhappy then. But Jack refused to listen. He neither denied nor admitted his past behaviors toward his son, as if he preferred that the facts be left in a kind of limbo, neither real nor unreal. But enveloped in an impenetrable fog. Mark tried, and tried again, but to no avail. "Why won't you listen?" he shouted to his father. "Why won't you accept the truth of the way things were?" One day his father yelled back, "Why won't you accept the fact that I'm never going to be the father you want?" The two men stared at each other in shocked silence, as if for one moment they glimpsed something about themselves that they would immediately proceed to forget. It's not possible that I was as cruel as he says, Jack thought, slamming his mind shut against the possibility. It's not possible that I'm out for blood, Mark thought, slamming his mind shut against the possibility. Soon, the shouting continued. In considering the psychology of these two people, can you find aspects of yourself? If so, what are the consequences to your self-esteem? Now let us consider this question. Suppose our negative reaction to some experience is so overwhelming that we feel we cannot practice self-acceptance. The feeling, thought, or memory is so distressing and agitating that acceptance feels out of the question. We feel powerless to not block and contract. The solution is not to try to resist our resistance. If we cannot accept a feeling, or a thought, or a memory, we should accept our resistance. In other words, start by accepting where we are. If we stay with the resistance at a conscious level, it will begin to dissolve. If we can accept the fact that right now, at this moment, we refuse to accept that we feel envy or anger or pain or longing, for example, or that we refuse to accept that we once did or believed such and such, if we acknowledge, experience, and accept our resistance, we discover a supremely important paradox. That resistance begins to collapse. When we fight a block, it grows stronger. When we acknowledge and accept it, it begins to melt, because its continued existence requires opposition. Sometimes in therapy, when a person has difficulty accepting some feeling, I will ask if he or she is willing to accept the fact of refusing to accept the feeling. I asked this once of a client, Victor, a clergyman who had great difficulty in owning or experiencing his anger, but who was a very angry man. My question disoriented him. "Will I accept that I won't accept my anger?" he asked me. I smiled and said, "That's right." He thundered, "I refuse to accept my anger, and I refuse to accept my refusal." I laughed and asked, "Will you accept your refusal to accept your refusal?" We've got to begin somewhere. Let's begin there. I asked him to face the group and say, "I'm not angry," over and over again. Soon he was saying it very angrily indeed. Then I had him say, "I refuse to accept my anger," which he shouted with escalating vigor. Then I had him say, "I refuse to accept my refusal to accept my anger," which he plunged into ferociously. Then I had him say, "But I am willing to accept my refusal to accept my refusal," and kept repeating it until eventually he broke down and joined in on the laughter of the group. "I get it," he grinned. "If you can't accept the experience, accept the resistance." That's it. So are you angry? I'm filled with anger. Can you accept that fact? I don't like it. We all know that. But can you accept it? I can accept it. Please look at me and say, "Nathaniel, I'm really angry. Nathaniel, I'm really angry." Again, please. "Nathaniel, I'm really angry." Good. Now we can begin to find out what you're angry about. A powerful tool for cultivating self-awareness, self-acceptance, and personal growth is the sentence completion procedure, which I wrote about in 2 earlier books, If You Could Hear What I Cannot Say and To See What I See and Know What I Know. One version of the procedure can serve us here. All that is required is a pen and a notebook. Excuse me. At the top of a fresh page, write one of the incomplete sentences or sentence stems I provide below. Follow the order of the stems as given. After you've written a stem at the top of the page, write 6 to 10 endings as rapidly as you can. Don't worry if your ending is literally true, or if one ending conflicts with another. None of your endings is written in stone. It is merely an exercise, an experiment. You may wish to tell yourself that you can't do this. I assure you that you can. I have taught this procedure to many thousands of people, and some of them always start out saying, I can't, and then proceed to do it. At the top of the first page, write the stem. Sometimes, looking back over my life, I can hardly believe that at one time I... Now write 6 to 10 completions for that sentence. Go. Then on the next page, write, it's not easy for me to admit that, and do your endings. Then on the next page, write, it's not easy for me to be self-accepting when I, and do the endings. Then, one of my emotions I have trouble accepting is blank. One of my actions I have trouble accepting is blank. One of the thoughts I tend to push out of my mind is blank. One of the things about my body I have trouble accepting is blank. If I were more accepting of my body, blank. If I was more accepting of things I have done, if I was more accepting of my feelings, if I was more honest about my wants and needs. The scary thing about being self-accepting is, if other people saw me being more self-accepting, the other good thing about being self-accepting might be, I am becoming aware, I am beginning to feel, as I learn to stop denying my experience, as I breathe deeply and allow myself to experience self-acceptance. I must caution you, if you merely read these words and do not actually do the exercises described, you will deprive yourself of discoveries I cannot otherwise make available to you. I trust now it has become clear why self-acceptance is essential to positive change. If I refuse to accept the fact that I often live unconsciously, how will I learn to live more consciously? If I refuse to accept the fact that I often live irresponsibly, how will I learn to live more responsibly? If I refuse to accept the fact that I often live passively, how will I learn to live more actively? I cannot overcome a fear whose reality I deny. I cannot correct a sexual problem I will not admit exists. I cannot heal a pain I refuse to recognize as mine. I cannot change traits I insist I do not have. I cannot forgive myself for an action that I will not acknowledge having taken. To accept ourselves is to accept the fact that we think, feel, that what we think, feel, and do are all expressions of the self at the time they occur. This doesn't mean that they are the final word on who we are, unless we encase them in cement through our denials and disownings. Allow me to share another personal example to further illuminate this issue. Some years ago, my wife Patricia, whom I very much loved, died. For a long time, my mind would endlessly review different aspects of our relationship. I would recall incidents when I had been thoughtless or unkind, and sometimes would push such memories away because they were unbearably painful. I did not deny the memories outright, but neither did I fully accept them and allow them and their implications to be assimilated and integrated. A part of myself was left fragmented, alienated from the rest of me. Later I remarried, and while I'm deeply and happily in love with my present wife, Devers, I saw certain patterns of thoughtlessness and a lack of consideration repeating themselves. I began to reflect on a fact that I taught to other people, that if I could not fully accept the fact of some of my past behavior, it was almost inevitable that in one form or another, I would repeat it. So I began to spend more time making real to myself certain actions I had taken in my earlier marriage, such as failing to respond on some occasion when Patricia needed my understanding or my help, or being overly impatient, or being excessively absorbed in my work. The perfect ordinary unkindness that love does not automatically prevent us from perpetrating. Making myself relive specific instances, reviewing detail by detail, was painful. Making myself look clearly at my actions was at times agitating beyond words, since Patricia was gone, and there was no way to make it up. But I knew that if I persisted, and of course, if I achieved the same clarity regarding my behavior in my present marriage with Devers, two things would happen. I would feel more integrated, and I would be less likely to repeat actions I would regret. I invite you to consider some action of yours that you regret. See if you can drop the self-blame while retaining the experience of yourself as the author of the action. Discover what it is like to accept that at some point in your life, you chose to take that action. What does this form of honesty feel like? What are you learning about self-esteem? After we accept the fact that our actions are our actions, there is still the issue of assessment, and we will have more to say in the next chapter about the process of assessing regretted behavior, thinking about it, and interpreting its meaning. in a way that nurtures rather than undermines self-esteem. But this much I will say now. The errors we are willing to confront become the rungs of the ladder leading to self-esteem. Anything that we have the possibility of experiencing, we have the possibility of disowning, either immediately or later in memory. Anything that does not fit our official self-concept, our official belief system, or that evokes anxiety for any reason whatever, we can reject. I can refuse to accept my sensuality, refuse to accept my spirituality. I can disown my sorrow, my joy. I can repress the memory of actions I am ashamed of, or repress the memory of actions I am proud of. I could deny my ignorance or my intelligence, refuse my limitations, or refuse to accept my potentials. I can conceal my weakness. I can conceal my strengths. I can deny my feelings of self-hatred. I can deny my feelings of self-love. I can pretend that I am more than I am. I can pretend that I am less than I am. I can disown my body, or I can disown my mind. The problem of non-self-acceptance is by no means confined to negatives. We can be as frightened of our assets as of our shortcomings, as frightened of our genius, ambition, excitement, or beauty as of our emptiness, passivity, depression, or unattractiveness. Our liabilities pose the problem of inadequacy, our assets, the challenge of responsibility. Our strengths or virtues can make us feel alone, alienated, cut off from the common herd, a target for envy and hostility, and our desire to belong can overcome any desire to actualize our highest potential. That many women, for example, associate high intelligence or achievement with loss of love or femininity is well known. It may take a great courage to be willing to admit, even in the privacy of our own minds, I can do things others don't seem to be able to do. I am more intelligent than anyone else in my family. Or I am unusually good looking. Or I want more out of life than the people around me. Or I can see farther and more clearly. I recall a young woman who came to me for treatment many years ago. Lorraine was 24 years old, had the face of an angel, and swore like a longshoreman. Excuse me. She had experimented with every drug I had ever heard of, and several I hadn't. When she was 18, she had slept in the basement of a college fraternity house where she obtained food and shelter in exchange for sexual services. Now she was supporting herself as a waitress. Something made her pick up my book, The Psychology of Self-Esteem, and it spoke to her. She called my office for an appointment. She did everything she could to make me dislike her, but I liked her. I was convinced that she was hiding an extraordinary person behind a cloak of degradation. I remember one day when, with hypnosis, I age regressed her to a day in junior high school. She began to weep. The teacher was asking questions at random of various pupils. I heard her whisper, "Please God, if she asks me a question, please don't let me know the answer." I asked, "Why?" She answered, "Because they hate you. They hate you if you know too much. They hate you if you're too smart." God, that sucks. It's a feeling I can empathize with. That feeling. People hating you for being smart. And I'm not trying to be all cocky here and talk about me thinking I'm smart, because at some point, it's being humble, being self-aware, to know that I'm an intelligent person. Everybody has intelligence. Like, nobody's just stupid. Everybody's got some. It's a spectrum. But anywho. But she was not only unusually intelligent. As a young girl, she had been tall for her age, physically strong, and unusually well coordinated. She could play almost any sport better than most boys, much to the anger and humiliation of her older brothers, who ridiculed, and tormented her. Without looking at a book, she was an A student. In the small town in which she lived, there was no one like her, no one to talk to. She felt hated by her family, and hated for her virtues, not for her shortcomings. As a teenager, she set out on a systematic course of self-destruction, as revenge against her family and simultaneously as a cry for help. One day in therapy, when we had been working together for about 6 months, she became very angry with me. When she could not articulate her reasons, I invited her to do the sentence completion. The bad thing about Nathaniel is, you believe in me. You refuse to see me as rotten. You make me feel my pain. You make me feel there's hope. By now she was half crying, half snarling. She went on, you make me believe in myself. You brought me back to life. You won't see me the way other people see me. I hate you. Now she was sobbing uncontrollably. It's so hard, she cried over and over again. What is? She looked at me with the fearful, hopeful eyes of a wild animal, admitting that what you see is there, that you're right, that I'm intelligent, that I'm special, that I'm good. Even now, almost 2 decades later, that moment remains with me as one of the great rewards of being a psychotherapist. The moment of seeing a human being summon the courage to admit and accept her own glory. 18 months after entering therapy, she was studying creative writing at UCLA. A few years later, she was earning her living as a journalist and was married. When I met her on the street by chance one day, about a decade after she left therapy, I might not have recognized her if she hadn't come over and greeted me with a laughing hello. She was well-dressed, self-assured, irresistibly cheerful, seemingly untouched by tragedy. I don't know if you remember me, but I remember you. I hesitated for a moment. Is it Lorraine? Sure, that's me. How great to see you. Do you know who you are, Nathaniel? Who am I? You're the man who refused to see me as a mongrel and a slut. You saw me as someone special, and you made me see it. God, there were times when I hated you so much. Accepting who I was, who I really was, that was the hardest thing I ever had to do in my whole life. People always talk about how hard it is to accept your faults. Somebody ought to talk about how hard it is. Somebody ought to talk about how hard it can be to accept your virtues. Sometimes the path to higher self-esteem is lonely and frightening. We cannot fully know in advance how much more satisfying our lives will be. But the more we are willing to experience and accept the many different aspects of who we are, the richer our inner worlds, the greater our resources, the more appropriate we will feel to the challenges and opportunities of life. Also, it is more likely that we will find or create a style of existence that will meet our individual needs. Thus far, we have dealt with self-acceptance as an application of rationality and realism, respect for our own experience, the refusal to be at war with ourselves. But there is another, deeper meaning to self-acceptance we need to consider. I'm referring to the courage required to admit that there is a place within us where, faults or no faults, we like ourselves. Many people find this a difficult idea to grasp. Self-acceptance, in the ultimate sense, refers to an attitude of self-value and self-commitment that derives fundamentally from the fact that I am alive and conscious, that I exist. It is an experience deeper than self-esteem. It is a pre-rational, pre-moral act of self-affirmation, a kind of primitive egoism that is the birthright of every conscious organism, and yet that human beings have the power to act against or nullify. Perhaps the following will help make this issue clear. Sometimes, after a client in therapy has expounded at length on his or her lack of self-esteem, and I want to evoke that other perspective, to which he or she seems to be oblivious, I will switch to sentence completion and ask the client to work with this stem. If I were willing to admit how much I secretly like myself, and then, after a few protests from the client, I typically hear endings such as the following. If I were willing to admit how much I secretly like myself, suppose that the people don't agree, I would be embarrassed. I'd have to feel a lot of denied pain. You'd be surprised. A lot of people would be shocked. I would be scared. My family wouldn't like it. I have no excuse for passivity. I could get on with my life. Then I might suggest this stem. The good thing about pretending to dislike myself is I beat other people to the punch. I have an excuse. No one expects things of me. People feel sorry for me. I don't have to do anything. It's easier. It's what my parents expected me. That one hit me different. The good thing about pretending to dislike myself is it's easier. If I had the courage to admit that, whatever my shortcomings, I like myself, I'd be free. I'd be telling the truth. I'd have to separate from my family. I'd respect myself. It'd be like stepping into another world. Everything would change. The world would open to me. I suggest you take your time and read these endings again. Don't rush past them. They reveal a good deal of valuable insight that may have relevance to you. An attitude of self-acceptance is precisely what an effective psychotherapist strives to awaken in a person of even the lowest self-esteem. This attitude can inspire a person to face whatever he or she most dreads to encounter within without collapsing into self-hatred, repudiating his or her value as a person, or surrendering the will to live. Thus, a person might be unhappy about experiencing poor self-esteem, yet accept it along with the self-doubts and feelings of guilt. I accept them as part of how I experience myself right now. Sometimes people confuse the whole subject of self-esteem by declaring that everyone should have good self-esteem regardless of anything that he or she does or fails to do. This is utterly impossible. They are confusing self-esteem, which just necessarily depends on certain conditions, with self-acceptance, which can be unconditional. Here's a simple sentence completion exercise that will allow you to begin to explore the issue of self-acceptance into your own life. Take a notebook, and at the top of the page, write the following sentence. Sometimes I dislike myself when I, and then do 6 to 10 endings as rapidly as you can. Once again, don't worry if your completions are all literally true. Don't censor yourself, or you will learn nothing. Then, one of the things I dislike about myself is this. One thing I like about myself is, I like myself least when I like myself most when I. Mother gave me a view of myself as this. Father gave me a view of myself as this. When I'm disliked, when I'm proud of something, no one else cares about or understands. If I were to admit how much I secretly like myself, the good thing about pretending to dislike yourself is, the scary thing about admitting that, fault or no fault, I like myself is, I am becoming aware, if any of what I'm writing is true, if I were willing to breathe deeply and allow myself to experience the joy of being. There's a good chance that if you participate in this exercise fully and conscientiously, you will make contact with that part of yourself that is deeper than doubts, fears, and guilts. I hope so. However, the discovery is not always greeted with delight. Sometimes it's frightening. Sometimes you want to pull back from it, refuse to accept it, because of some intuitive knowledge that to accept it fully is almost irresistibly to confront the responsibility of living consciously. More than one client in therapy has protested, if I accept the fact that I like myself, I'll have to behave differently. Or if I accept the fact that I like myself, I'll have to stay too conscious. But when you fail to live consciously, and this is one of the most important facts about human psychology, the deepest and most primitive level of your being tends, in effect, to turn against you by generating pain at the level of self-esteem. It is that deepest I we offend when we default on the integrity that positive self-esteem requires. If I do not have the loyalty to stand by a friend, that friend feels betrayed by me. By this token, if I do not have the loyalty to stand by myself, which means the courage to know that I like myself and to embrace the responsibility of doing so, then I too feel betrayed, even though I may be unable to explain my feeling or to articulate my experience. If you review the material in this chapter and the exercise you did, you will almost certainly be struck by the fact that you are more self-accepting in some areas than in others. You may accept certain of your physical attributes, thoughts, feelings, or actions while denying or disowning others. Make a list of 6 facts about yourself you have difficulty accepting completely. This may require a challenging level of honesty from you. Remember that accepting does not mean liking. Then in your notebook, write the hard thing about accepting. Then do the same thing. If I were to accept completely, if it turns out that the truth is the truth, if it turns out that the truth is the truth, whether I accept it or not, then I am becoming aware. Perhaps it is now clear to you that self-acceptance is truly a heroic act. What would it mean, practically, if over the next 7 days you were to commit to experimenting each day with new instances of self-acceptance? I guess I have homework to do. But that's going to be chapter 4.